Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here at the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network's virtual open house, the last one of the year. We're so excited to have you. And we have a very packed agenda today. And before we get started and I review what we're going to cover, we do want to know who's in the virtual room. So we have a little poll that we're going to ask everybody to take, just to quickly show what sector you represent. As folks may know, if you're familiar with Farm to School and all of the initiatives related to Farm to School, there are a lot of different people within our communities who are involved in helping to give food and agricultural learning experiences to kids. And on our feature topic today, help with procuring local food from within our communities to serve in school meals. So it's just really great to know who all is here, whether it's food service staff, or maybe you're an educator or student, or you represent state agency or government. We've got a lot of community partners and nonprofits that are involved in this work as well. So thank you so much for taking this poll. Looks like folks are still coming in and participating, which is awesome. And we've got a really big mix, which tends to be the case. We'll talk a little bit later on about some additional opportunities for anybody interested in getting more involved with the network to participate. But in the beginning of the new year, we typically run some short virtual new member info sessions. And I always find that the 3 to 5 people who are at each of the sessions represent a variety of sectors, which is really cool and also just very coincidental. So let's see, we're gonna give people a few more minutes or 1 more minute to take this poll while I also review the agenda, and then we'll close it just to kind of get a sense of who all is here. But I think people may be able to see too the responses, right? Can everybody see the spread from the different sectors? Yeah, so we've got a wide variety of people here. So that's very exciting. If you're just joining, please go ahead and take the poll that's open. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself briefly and review our agenda. And then we have one more little icebreaker we're going to ask everybody to participate in as well. So for today's open house, we are going to be featuring local food purchasing incentives and a variety of different ways that practitioners in Pennsylvania are already purchasing local food to serve in school meals. You can see here on the agenda that we're going to have an overview for the first 20-ish minutes, where you're going to hear a little bit more about what a local food purchasing incentive is and some of the values and ideas that we have for how we can get an LFPI, or local food purchasing incentive, set up here in Pennsylvania. Based on a lot of information that we're gleaning from states all across the country that have already implemented LFPIs, as well as a bunch of research and some pilot programs that we've been conducting right here in Pennsylvania. So you'll get to hear a lot about what an LFPI is. After that overview, we're going to spend just about 10 minutes in some smaller group breakouts so people have a chance to share a little bit about themselves and why they value making sure that kids have access to local food, not only learning about food and agriculture, but also having local food in their school meals. And hopefully that'll be a chance for people to get to network and know each other a little bit more in those small group discussions. And then following those small groups, we'll have our practitioner panel, which is a standard piece of our agenda we always have in our open houses. I'm very excited to have 3 practitioners here, and Lauren Ross, who's the manager for the PFSN, to be able to facilitate the panel. She'll be introducing them and sharing a little bit more context on why we've invited them here specifically during this open house featuring local food purchasing. And then at the very end, we're going to end with some announcements about current opportunities that we hope people will be able to take advantage of to be able to help purchase local food or sell local food if you're a farmer or grower. And then we'll end with some announcements. At the very end of the meeting, for maybe the last 10 minutes, if people here are new to the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network, we'll do a little bit of an orientation and also answer any questions people might have, especially about how to get more involved with our efforts. So that's the agenda. And with that, we are going to end the poll, but folks can kind of see the spread here. A lot of community partners and nonprofits, some farmers and growers, also pretty even split of educators and students, state agency and government staff, and a couple other folks here from early care and education sites, companies. So thanks everybody for being here. It's really great to see the mix. So the icebreaker we've got is we are going to put a link into the chat where people can click on it and submit their answer to the following question, just one word. So go ahead and check to see the link in the chat. There we go. Lauren's just posted it there. And if people can just answer, I know it might be tough to slim down to one word, but if you can try to do that, it would be great. Why should Pennsylvania prioritize kids having access to locally grown food in school meals? So go ahead and click on that link and just put in the first word that might come to your mind. We're going to actually show here on the screen what's going to populate, which is a word cloud. Maybe people have seen this in the past. And if it has to be 2 words, that's okay too. Don't think too much about it. Few words is fine as well. So here's some of the answers that folks have. Later on, we're also going to be asking people to actually rank their personal choices on some of the values related to LFPIs and local food purchasing. But we wanted to start with this just open-ended question to see what kind of words come out. So this is pretty neat to see all the different answers in here. Thank you so much for participating in this little icebreaker. And we'll definitely be coming back to some of these responses as well. Okay, so I'm going to actually now kick it over to my friend and colleague, Tegan Hagee, who has been very involved in food systems in a variety of different roles, and right now sits on the leadership team for the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network. And she has been really digging into a lot of details around LFPIs and even working with a variety of other states on getting policies introduced and helping with some of the current programs that are supporting local food purchasing. So thank you so much, Tegan, for the time you put in to help be here and present this information. I will pass it over to you to give us the rundown of LFPIs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sam, for that lovely introduction. Oh, things are moving here. All right. So yes, I've been involved in Farm to School in Pennsylvania for 15 years, and it's really fun for me to be back presenting on a farm to school webinar with this star-studded cast. Everyone is really in for a treat today, especially with all the people who are presenting right after me. Because there's such a wide variety of participants, I did just want to pull up this relatively well-known icon from the National Farm to School Network that really highlights well the 3 components of a complete farm to school program. And those are considered school gardens, some level of food or agriculture education, and of course, procurement. And next slide. Okay, thank you. So procurement is highlighted here because that's really the focus of local food purchasing incentives, our talk today. And also, it is really just become the focus of a lot of farm to school programs, particularly because it's the most challenging. It only receives that focus because it's the most challenging. So I just really want to highlight that it's not that school gardens and nutrition and agriculture education are not as equally important. You can see there's 3 equal sections here, but it's that procurement tends to give farm to school practitioners the most challenges and barriers. And so that way it demands the most energy around it. Next. So why should we focus on local procurement? Really, if we're looking at things from an ecological perspective, procurement is the food systems change. Procurement is the major component that has to shift to make farm to school happen. And there can be a relatively impressive outcome when procurement shifts and food systems happen. There's a bucket of public health nutrition, and there's a bunch of research around shifting to local procurement can increase participation in school meals. There's also the food security, community economic health perspective, in that there's a lot of money that goes into child nutrition programs. And if all of that money is leaving those communities, it doesn't really invest in local agriculture. And then, of course, if farm to school programs are more values-based, it also can improve environmental health, in particular, if those programs support sustainable agriculture or small farmers. All right, so just in case people here are not familiar about some brief stats on child nutrition programs in Pennsylvania, and another term for child nutrition programs is just school meal programs or school lunch. There's generally around 1 million lunches a day that are served, and the budget just for the lunch program is about $729 million. And all of those funds, that $729 million, comes right now from the federal government. Based on the most recent USDA Farm to School census, about 1.5% of that budget is spent on local foods. So while $10 million is a large number, when we're putting it in perspective, it is really clear that we could probably do better in focusing more of that money into local food systems. And I also just wanted to bring everyone's attention to that chart on the right. Those numbers seem really big, and it might seem that schools have all the money they need to make, incredible farm to school programs happen, but they're serving a lot of students. And when you really break that down, it works out anywhere between $3.68 to 41 cents a meal that schools are reimbursed. And that has to cover staff, it has to cover equipment, and it has to cover food. So these big numbers break down into not a huge federal reimbursement, and certainly makes that procurement change even more difficult. All right, so the federal government has actually been supporting farm to school programs and procurement change for quite some time now. 2013, the very first USDA Farm to School grant program was rolled out. You'll be hearing more about that later. That meant that the USDA specifically spent funds on technical assistance to all the state agencies as well as their grantees. They rolled out the first farm to school census, collecting data and research, and then of course rolled out the individual, what's now called Patrick Leahy Grant Program. They've distributed over $84 million for 10 years over those 10 years, but it's really not for food. That is for supporting that procurement change. And you can just sort of rapidly click here, whoever's doing the slides, like 4 or 5 times. So here's some of those resources that they've put out. So while there are resources out there, some fabulous webinars, etc., there's been a sort of cycle that advocates and then state governments have started to notice, and there have been huge changes that have happened in those 10 years. But next slide. If 10 years later, we're still at 1.5% of the entire NSLP budget in Pennsylvania going to local foods, we know that there are still local barriers that are not being met. And this is really where state governments started to notice the need for local food purchasing incentives. Local barriers need local support and solutions. And recent research has shown that not only do family farms and small farms still struggle to break into the institutional school food market, schools still report the cost of local food as a primary barrier to increasing the amount of local foods in school meals. And I'm going to pause here and just answer any answer any quick questions. Oh, I see one question. And schools are not required to get local food products directly from farms. They're allowed to get them from any level of distributor. And I think that's it. And we'll go to the next slide. So local food purchasing incentives here. This is essentially my working definition here. It's state level policy, state level legislation that provides meaningful funding to child nutrition programs. Those are the programs that states run to feed children in school settings to directly offset the cost of local foods. Ideally, the idea is to increase the amount of local foods that are served in child nutrition programs. And also more recently, that's been expanded to early care or ECE settings. And to date, at least 16 local food purchasing incentives have been passed through state legislators. Most of those have happened in like the past 5 years. And this little flow chart is also care of the National Farm to School Network. It's pretty cute. It sort of shows how the state agencies through state policy provide the funding to the child nutrition programs, and then they purchase from local farms and food producers. That also could mean a local food distributor, consolidator, and then those individuals provide that food to the child nutrition programs. Next. So we generally get questions, or I've gotten questions about, what does that mean, local food purchasing incentives, and how does it vary from how Farm to School has been talking about from a federal perspective? So from a federal perspective, the definition of local is in the hands of the school. And with most of the local food purchasing state level legislation, it's generally defined as a state boundary. 92% of the LFPIs that have passed include state boundaries as that definition. That really benefits the entire state and generally tends to make sense and aligns with state agriculture priorities. The types of products that are allowed, all of the legislations that's passed so far have allowed fresh fruits and vegetables. The large majority also includes unprocessed proteins, beans, and grains. Some include minimally processed grains and value-added dairy like yogurt, and rarely do they include things like fluid milk and school garden items. Next. So no two local food purchasing incentives look the same. No two pieces of state legislature look exactly the same, but I've bucketed them here into two examples. I'm calling one a basic incentive, and that really just provides a percentage per meal served or per plate to offset that cost. And the example I'm using here is Vermont. Their legislation offers $500,000 annually. It is really, they do have to complete a sample application. They do have to track local purchases, but any district inside of the state can opt into it based upon the meals they served in the previous year. And they receive 15 cents to 25 cents per meal based upon the amount of local products that they serve. So they get more money if they serve more local products, and it's only for food. And expanded incentive, they tend to look more like a full grant program. The legislation also includes funding for things like staff at the state level, sometimes training. The example I'm giving here is Washington State, which is a newer piece of legislation. They allocated $5 million over about a 2-year budget. It is a competitive grant program. It did include funds for a state level coordinator. They offer a tiered amount based on district size, and up to 25% of the total award amount is allowable for non-food costs like staff training, equipment, etc. And they also receive a lump sum based on a per meal formula. Next. So here's a bit of an overview. All of these programs, wherever they're passed, and there are programs all across the nation and every region of the nation, receive bipartisan support. This is not a partisan issue, which has always been the case with Farm to School. Most of them had at least one state coordinator included in that legislation to run the program. Most of them were housed in the Department of Education, which makes sense because most states, the Department of Education allocates the child nutrition program funds for schools. And the legislation was driven by outside advocacy groups and had extensive partner support, as opposed to just some, representative or policymaker thinking that they had a smart idea. And all of the states, this is really interesting to me, had at least one additional farm to school program or policy prior to passing specific local food purchasing incentive policy. Someone can, yes. So here's some impact considerations. And this is really around the design of a local food purchasing incentive from a policy perspective. So what I'm trying to get across here is that the impact of the program comes through the policy designs. So it's very possible that an LFPI could provide equitable access to local foods through distributing financial incentives to schools with the greatest need. And what the greatest need mean can really vary. It's not, that access is not as always clear-cut as it may seem. Next. It definitely can boost the local agricultural economy by increasing institutional demand, and how the policy is written can really amplify that as well. It definitely can increase participation in meals, ideally by increasing the volume and variety of unprocessed fresh ingredients in school meals. It can increase food security of a community by continuing to invest in the local agriculture there. Definitely can engage children and make them really aware of how important local agriculture is. And there's also the potential for it to improve water, soil, and air quality if that policy includes supportive language for sustainable agricultural practices. So here are some buckets that we've put up here, and you can see they're not really ranked around what a values-based local food purchasing incentive could look like. So, for example, it could have language that focuses on the environmental impact. If there's language in there that incentivizes farmers who are using sustainable agricultural practices like no-till. It could have an impact on farm worker rights if there is an incentive in there for farms or organizations that really set baseline farm worker rights. It could support public health through ensuring health equity through a grading system, and obviously economy as well, local agriculture economy. And then, of course, animal husbandry and welfare. Some things that would come underneath that would look like, something that would be an incentive for grass-fed operations, or, a lower antibiotic use. So I just want everyone to kind of look at these 6 buckets surrounding what a values-based LFPI could look like for 1 second and take them in. And then we're going to go to the next slide, and Lauren should be putting another of those links in the chat. That's going to be a Slido, and you're going to rank the values that you just saw in order of how important they are to you. If you were designing a piece of legislation, which of those values would you want to be emphasized?
And we're going to give folks some time to do this, but also we'll share the results at the end of our panel too. So, so go ahead and click that link. Does anyone have any trouble finding the link? Should be able to see it right there in the chat. And Yeah, it should be pretty easy to do. You just click on them in order and it'll do numbers 1 through 6. So again, we'll share the results of that taken on a slide at the end of the panel. So one other thing I'll interject here before Tegan introduces our next speakers to share about a really awesome report is if folks do have any reactions or questions, feel free to pop those in the chat at any time. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a pretty packed agenda, so we might not have a ton of time in the big group to open it up for questions. So just feel free to do that. We will answer them over the chat or out loud if we have the availability to do so too. So back to you, Tegan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, I was just looking at the Slido and trying to figure out how to make it work. I think I did it. But it's my pleasure to introduce the next two presenters who really spent, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yes. There you go. Who the next two presenters are Audrey and Elaine, and they are amazing individuals and colleagues who come really from a state agency perspective and spent an entire year thinking about local food purchasing incentives and what would work best for Pennsylvania from a state agency perspective. And I will turn things over to them.
Thank you, Tegan. So I am Audrey Hess. I work at the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I'll start us off. Elaine will jump in a moment. The project that Tegan referred to, this Pennsylvania Local Purchasing Incentive Investigation, was funded by a fiscal year 22 USDA Farm to School grant to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And the investigation was a collaboration with many folks involved, but led by the Department of Education collaborating with Penn State University's office known as Project PA. And as Tegan referred to, there are a lot of existing local food purchasing incentives across the country. And so we were interested in gathering information from folks that are involved in those programs in other states, as well as folks within Pennsylvania, to see what perspectives they might have in order to inform thoughts moving forward about a potential LFPI in Pennsylvania. Report at the Project PA website that has it's on the homepage of the website, which is on this slide. Next slide. Data was collected through focus groups and interviews. So folks outside of Pennsylvania with whom we spoke were program administrators at the state level from 6 states that have local food incentives. You can see those states listed here. And then we spoke with operators of child nutrition programs. All of them were school-based program operators that participate in the local food incentives in their states. Within Pennsylvania, we conducted 3 focus groups with operators of child nutrition programs. 2 of them were with school nutrition program operators, and 1 was with child and adult care food program operators to gather their perspectives. We talked with 8 entities that either represent or are suppliers of Pennsylvania produced foods, and also conducted 2 interviews with state agency representatives here in Pennsylvania. The interviews and focus groups were recorded, and from the transcripts, there were summaries generated. And then a panel of 9 individuals that represent different farm to school stakeholder positions joined us from PDE and Project PA. These 9 additional folks helped to process the data that was collected to develop a summary and key takeaways. So the key takeaways we have sort of clustered into 3 groupings. 1 is program design, and also program administration and program implementation. So I'll touch on program design and then turn it over to Elaine. Next slide. So in terms of program design, one thing that we heard from multiple interviews was that keeping legislative language broad can be important. If the language is very prescriptive, it sometimes can reduce the flexibility of a program to be tweaked as it grows and perhaps needs some changes. It was emphasized that the entity or entities that would be involved with the administration of the program should be involved in discussions around its design. It's clear from other states that funds are needed to support the administration of this type of program. I know Tegan's sort of definition of this type of program included the word meaningful, and that was something that came through, that the amount of incentive needs to be meaningful such that it makes it worth program operators' time to engage with the incentive program. Next slide. A concern that was brought out in a number of the interviews was that if the incentive program seems limited in term, that can create challenges in terms of producers, for example, not being confident in scaling up if they don't know that the program is going to be a long-term incentive available. Tegan referred to some of the expanded programs. So in states where there's funding for things like equipment, that sounded to be a positive because that helps increase the capacity for child nutrition programs to process and prepare local foods. Reimbursement structures or application processes that are very complex sounded like they have, in some cases, created confusion and mistrust. So it's important to have those structures clear and consistent. In terms of fluid milk, it's important to consider the objectives of the program and deciding whether or not that would be an incentive product. And then finally, in terms of design, that early care and education settings may have different needs. So the design of a local purchasing incentive program for them might be different than the design that's optimal for schools. And I'll turn it over to Elaine to talk about program administration and program implementation takeaways. Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks, Audrey. So as Tegan had mentioned, in the majority of cases, these programs are administered at the state level by the Department of Education, but there were some examples where there were responsibilities that were split between both the Department of Education and the Department of Ag, and we kind of repeatedly heard those types of setups described as error-prone, cumbersome, and can cause delays in decision-making, since the decision-making involves two state agencies instead of just one. So then when considering the state agency that will be responsible for administering a program, one of the considerations that should be taken into regard is what is the current system and platform that exists within that state agency, and how familiar are CNP operators currently with those systems and platforms. So in addition to needing to have a platform in which to collect documentation, perhaps applications, another responsibility of the administering agency is dispersing payments to SFAs. So that's another consideration. And we heard that there should be input from the administering agency's fiscal team to ensure that the process for dispersing those payments is feasible. So can it be done as a lump sum payment? Can it be done as a per meal reimbursement? It needs to fit within what is possible within that state agency. Next slide, please. Obviously, we know that CNP operators are overburdened in terms of documentation requirements, reporting requirements, and LFPI programs would have some reporting responsibilities for CNP operators in terms of documenting purchases. And what we've learned and heard repeatedly was it's really important that that strategies be in place to ease that reporting burden on CNP operators. And that can be through using automated processes or existing platforms that CNP operators are already familiar with. Another kind of important consideration is defining what is meant by local, what products actually qualify within the incentive program. And if processed products qualify, there needs to be clear criteria about what processed products qualify. Some programs employ universal eligibility, meaning that all SFAs qualify. It's not an application process. And we learned that, or heard that, there should be strategies in place to ensure that allocated funds will not go unused. So in other words, if funds are set aside for certain SFAs, and then those SFAs end up not using those funds, perhaps they could have been used by other SFAs. Next slide, please. We heard repeatedly the importance of partnerships in supporting LFPI programs. This is not just something that can be easily and successfully done just by the administering state agency. Partners that we heard were critical included state farm-to-school networks, nonprofits, other state agencies, extension programs, and partners played a variety of roles, including advocacy roles, assisting in providing training and technical assistance, and conducting program evaluations. We looked at training and technical assistance needs for CNP operators and found that areas that training and technical assistance would most likely be needed include understanding the program requirements, helping connect CNP operators with producers, state and federal procurement regulations and how local procurement can fit within those regulations. We heard from several states and CNP operators about the need for training on culinary skills for school food service staff to be able to process local products and food safety. We also heard about the importance role that food hubs can play in assisting with producer outreach. They seem better able to scale up to meet demand than some other types of producer groups. They are perhaps most likely to be able to be currently providing the types of documentation that would be required, and they can assume some responsibilities to lessen the burden on individual producers. Next slide, please. Finally, some final points in terms of implementation. Evaluating the program and sharing those results is important. We didn't delve too deeply into what should be included in an evaluation of an LFPI program. That might be something worth some further investigation. But we have seen from other states that have LFPI programs, evaluation reports have been released. So we talked a bit about outreach and training and technical assistance that would be needed for the CNP operator side. The other side of that farm-to-school equation, of course, is the supplier side, and outreach is needed there as well, because suppliers are going to be needing to provide some documentation to document that the products that they are providing meet the LFPI program criteria. So some suppliers may not currently have systems in place that allow them to provide that documentation. So making them aware of the requirements in advance of program initiation would give them the chance to make those changes. And we also heard that, in some cases, this is a little bit of a challenge in getting that required documentation, especially from certain types of suppliers, and in particular, perhaps from broadline suppliers. And we heard, at least from one state, that when the state agency made the requests of these suppliers for this documentation, there was not much change, and it was much more effective when that demand came from child nutrition program operators themselves, as they represent the customer bases for those suppliers. And I think that sums up our investigation.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Elaine and Tegan. And I see some good questions or statements being thrown into the chat, which is great. Just to share where we're at in our presentation, we've wrapped up our overview of LFPIs. If people have additional reactions or questions in our small group breakouts, there will be a little bit of time to just share some of those, and our small group facilitators can answer to the best of their abilities. We also have a little outline for small groups on the next slide, Jamie. And also Lauren popped them into the chat for people too. But this is just a chance for folks to kind of introduce yourself, for those who are willing and able to, come off mute or even put it in the chat, whatever way works best for you. And also answer the question, what values resonate most with you when it comes to procuring, selling, and or serving local food and school meals, and why? We're also, when we come back from small groups in about 10 minutes, we're going to kick off our panel, but we will also have a chance for folks to fill out that ranking again, and Lauren will give a little bit of instructions if anyone was having some trouble. So let's go ahead and break into small groups. Again, if you're able to come off mute and come off video, that's great. If for whatever reason you need to stay in the big room and don't want to split into a small group, that's okay. I'll be here with Jamie, but we'll see folks back here at around 3:50, so about 8 minutes.
All right, so we're so grateful to have our practitioners here to share their experience with purchasing local food and serving local products in school meals for kids. We might not have a ton of time for questions because of our packed agenda today, so please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. If at some point our panelists feel they can address the question, they will do so. But if not, Sam or any other PFSM leaders can also answer those questions in the chat. So just be sure to put them in there, and hopefully someone will get to that. We also welcome other practitioners to share any related highlights or resources that are related to the stories that come up. We want these open houses to be a place of network and a place to connect and share strategies with each other. So feel free to respectfully share as you see fit. And if you want to express how impressed you are with these great stories, feel free to leave an emoji to show how excited you are, or a positive comment. I'm sure everybody would love to see it. So we're going to get started with Matt Ferry. He is the kitchen administrator and head chef from Children's Village, an early childhood education center in Philadelphia. And the Children's Village is one of the original 2 recipients of the Philadelphia Quarterback for Local grant administered by the Food Trust. The Quarterback for Local grant provides early childhood education sites, or ECEs, with 25 cents for every meal served, which includes Pennsylvania local fruits, vegetables, or herbs. This pilot serves to help operators of ECEs to source more local foods, and it was initiated based on discussions in the policy working group from the PA Farm to School Network. And through this program, we're evaluating the results to inform future policy suggestions for local food purchasing incentives. We asked Matt to speak on his experience as a kitchen administrator and the head chef in ordering, preparing, and serving local meals to the kids. So thank you for sharing, Matt.
Good afternoon. We started purchasing local, or I had wanted to start purchasing local prior to the pandemic, and everything kind of got pushed to the side. And then when we were presented with the opportunity to join the Quarterback for Local, I jumped at it, obviously, got the support of my director. But for me, purchasing local is important not only for supporting local growers, small family farmers, but I feel that's also increased quality in terms of the freshness of the produce. It's not traveling as far. Oftentimes, a lot of the produce I've been getting is grown through integrated pest management, so they try to avoid pesticides and herbicides as much as possible. So I feel like it's a healthier product. And from a public health standpoint, I think it's really important to introduce children to a wide variety of locally available produce and, get them to start incorporating it into their diet. The produce that I've been able to get since we started has, run the spectrum, and it's all seasonal. So, we've gotten winter squash, we've gotten turnips and beets, which, were 2 things that the kids had never really been introduced to before. They had golden beets and red beets, and then we've gotten rainbow chard and fresh spinach, all local, rainbow carrots, which the kids really loved. The potatoes that we've been getting from local farms have been much better quality, flavor and texture wise. The 3 or 4 different varieties of sweet potatoes we've been able to get, not just the orange sweet potatoes, but the like Japanese sweet potatoes that are a little starchier and like a white flesh. Of course, in the fall, we've been getting local apples and pears. Summer, we've been able to get melons, some berries from PA, but, Jersey obviously corners the market for, a lot of the berries. And then, in like November, December, we were able to get local broccoli, cauliflower. I tried out Romanesco, which is, an alien looking relative of cauliflower, but it's kind of spiky, and the kids actually really liked it because it looked strange. We've gotten Brussels sprouts, and then I think like early spring or mid spring, we were able to get bok choy and tatsoi, which are two, Asian. Essentially, they're related to mustard grains, but the kids loved it. And then I've also been able to get frozen vegetables that are much better quality than what I was able to procure before. We were getting frozen peas from Poland, which were a horrible quality, and the local, what I call local, it's not coming from Pennsylvania, but they're from Jersey, and they're so much better, the corn and the peas, when I do have to serve frozen vegetables. It's definitely been a benefit for the program, I think. And there have definitely been some challenges in terms of availability, last minute issues with quality, where whatever some things I've ordered just haven't been able to be delivered because, it got really hot, and say the cilantro started, seeding and just was bad quality. And then to creatively fit produce into the menu based on seasonal availability has been a bit of a challenge, but it's an interesting challenge, I'll say that much. It can be kind of fun trying to piece things in, to make the grant work so I can, serve local. It might not be what's on the menu, but we are good about, doing substitutions and whatnot. And then, sometimes there's more labor required to prep the items, and some of my staff might need additional training. They might have never seen the item before, but overall it works out. And sometimes it can be more costly. We have been getting some local like meats as well, not just produce, and that can be a little bit more costly, but overall the quality is so much better. And the parents have been really appreciative of the efforts we've made. And the kids have really taken to the wider variety of vegetables and fruits and the fresher quality of the items. So that's about what I've got for you guys.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm just posting in the chat one of our more recent blog posts about the Quarterback for Local program. And we're also really excited to announce that we've welcomed 3 more sites into the program. So if you want to read more about that, you can check out that link. All right. So next, we're going to hear from Jillian Bergman, Director of Food Services at Tulpehocken. I might be pronouncing that wrong. You'll have to let me know. Area School District in Berks County. She has been a PA Farm to School grantee for 3 years, from 2019 to 2022. And you'll hear a little bit more about the PA Farm to School grant at the end of the open house from Patrick Andrews. To give a little more context before Jill shares her story, this is a grant opportunity available for schools and ECE sites to use on farm to school activities, which include funding to support training for teachers and staff around farm to school, food and agriculture agriculture activities like taste tests, farm field trips for kids, school garden and cafeteria supplies, and also procuring local food from farmers. We asked Jill to share about her experience using these funds for local food procurement. So thank you for being here, Jill.
Thanks for having me. Okay, so as Lauren mentioned, I'm from Tulpehocken Area School District. It's a small school district in Berks County. We only have about 1,300 students. I came to Tulpehocken from a contract food service management company in Pennsylvania. With that company, I worked in, I think, 4 different districts. So I got to see a lot of different ideas, a lot of different things. And when I came to Tulpehocken and kind of settled in, I realized it's very rural and very agricultural. My school board was made up of mostly farmers. A lot of the families were farming families. My coworkers, as I met them and learned about them, were farming families. So although I don't have a farming background or an agricultural background, I quickly started to kind of learn that this is a great direction to go in with Farm to School. So I applied for the first grant. I started really small as far as the amount of money that I requested because I wasn't sure what I was going to be spending it on, and I didn't want to not be able to spend it if I was granted it. Started off with just some local apples. We currently get our apples from Fracon Farms, which is in Boyertown. They deliver, which is wonderful. They reach out weekly, let me know what they have offered. They also do local apple cider, which I've worked into the program as like an a la carte item. We sold it, did a little apple promotion where the students could buy local apple cider in the fall. Additionally, I've been working with a company called Dirt to Dinner Distributors, which I believe just started last fall. So it would have been the fall of 2022. I don't know if you've ever heard of Wild Tea. It's a local Pennsylvania, they call it not field tea, but I can't think of what she calls it. Anyways, Sherry Furman is a teacher in a neighboring school district. She is the owner of the Wild Tea company, Meadow Tea. That's what they call it, Meadow Tea. She is the owner of Wild Tea, and we were getting her products in just because we would sell the Wild Tea to the students. And she and a couple other local community members started the Dirt to Dinner Distributors, where they would work with other small local farmers, put together a list of offerings and email it out to school districts and deliver it with the Wild Tea. So essentially these small farmers had no means to make all these deliveries to all these schools. They didn't have the framework, to get connected and get items delivered. So I started to work with Dirt to Dinner Distributors last year. I was bringing in local yogurt, cheese curds, apples, obviously, peppers, broccoli, watermelon, breakfast sausage. We brought in beef sandwich steak to make like Philly cheesesteaks. One of the biggest hits was a beef brisket that we brought in. Sherry had it on special on her list. And, I contacted my cafeteria manager and said, hey, this is an option. What do you think? And she said, let's do it. Let's give it a try. And we did a beef brisket sandwich for the students, which was very popular. One of my school board members, because he knew where the farm the beef was coming from, he thinks it may have actually been some of his beef. So he was really excited about it. Came that day, got a sandwich. So we worked with the Dirt to Dinner Distributors. Another organization that I've worked with is the PA Beef Council. And they connected me with Happy Valley Meats. Through Happy Valley Meats last year, we did a really nice meal at the end of the year with a thin cut a thin cut ribeye steak sandwich. I actually grilled them outside for the students on 2 grills. We brought them inside, served them on sandwiches with onions and peppers. And we had reps from the PA Beef Council there with information about beef and also information about Happy Valley meats, the different farms that the meats are coming from. It was interesting though, because I don't think the students, although we said these are steaks, we're grilling them, they kind of didn't believe us almost because they were like, we're in the cafeteria. There's no way you're giving me a ribeye steak. So we cut them up into little samples, and that was, the ticket to get them to come over and choose the steak sandwich. Last year, before I got hooked up with Happy Valley Meats, I also was working with Zancroft Beef, which is in Wummelsdorf, PA. One of the farmers there reached out to me. Her is, family with children. It's a dairy farm that also has beef products. And she said, we're just trying to get into schools, and reached out and we connected. I went out and visited her farm. I took the cafeteria manager and the principal from one of our buildings. We did some pictures and videos, toured the farm, and then I have flat screens in the cafeteria as a means for like digital signage. And I was able to have the pictures of their principal with the cows, and kids really enjoyed that. And we ended up doing ground beef and hamburger patties from Zancroft Beef. So those are, the products. Obviously milk, I'm getting local milk from Clover Dairy Farms in Reading as well. That's kind of my, summary of what products we've been using. Was asked to talk about some of the challenges. Big challenge this year is, although for 3 years I did get that farm to school grant, I lucked out, or I didn't luck out this year. So I didn't receive that grant. I've been looking into other opportunities, and I've found that the grants that are out there, although are really exciting, they don't allow purchase of food to be used for the grant money. It's more for setting up systems and innovation and, partnerships and things like that, which are all wonderful, but just not what I'm used to. So I'm going to have to kind of change courses and look into that and see, how I can use that model to keep my farm to school program going. I love the idea of, the incentive per meal, if you're going to use the local food and commit to it, that you can get that almost flat rate per meal and know that you can count on that. Another challenge is the fact that your local items are often less processed and, involve more prep work. And my key takeaway there is just to talk to the staff ahead of time, get their ideas, ask them what they think. And then when the product does come in the door, they've already agreed to it. They already have some ideas. And if they can't do it, they'll tell you they can't do it. And that's not something that you're going to bring in.
Thank you, Jillian. Really quickly, before we move on to our last panelist, I'm going to shift gears and move things over to Patrick Andrews, who's just going to tell us a little bit more about the PA Farm School Grant.
So just a little bit about the program. I don't have all of the details locked in for the coming year, but basically you get an award as high as $15,000 that requires a 25% match. That can be cash or in kind. And just to be clear, that means 25% of the total project. So the award would be 3/4 of the dollars and the match would be 1/4 of the dollars. So adding up to one whole project. All right. You absolutely can use the money as Jillian was saying on purchases with local farmers. We're really excited to see folks trying that out and learning how to work with farmers. That is definitely a big intention of the program, is to help provide an opportunity to build those relationships. Schools that are eligible are, classrooms that are pre-K through 8th grade. So that's, kindergarten through 8th and early care and education centers, or a school that just also has the pre-K incorporated into it. You don't have to have all of those grades. I get that question all the time. Any one of those grades or all of them, is fine. And you're eligible. Again, the 25% match can be cash. It can be, cash, or it can be matched services or materials. Any of it just has to be documented. You just have to document what it is, and, sort of share how you're going to document that in your proposal, and then it all qualifies. In terms of the RFA, our intent, I'll start at the end of the process. Our intent is still to award contracts in July, as it was this last year, until the budget snafu happened and just derailed our whole plan, basically, and had us having very late awards yet again. So barring any budget arguments that might happen between the executive and legislative branch, we hope to contract in July. Our hope is also to publish the RFA immediately after the governor's budget address. Now, that plan has not been approved by the governor's office, but we do know that is the soonest possible time that we could get approval for. Right. So the reason we want to do that is that, the grant program has become incredibly competitive, really well subscribed, which is great. It's giving us lots of data that we're hoping, will make a great argument for the LFPI policy, as well as maybe even more funding for the grant program itself. But we want to have more time so that we can do a better job of ensuring that the funds are getting spread around equitably amongst schools and types of schools. And we want to have a little more time for analysis and conversation amongst the scoring body. So it's not the earlier RFA, to be clear, is not going to mean an earlier award. It's just more time to do a better job of being really super, super intentional about how the awards are given out. And the last thing I'll just say, because I know, sometimes people get upset when they don't get an award. The thing is, it's very competitive, and there are lots of good projects. There are lots of good projects, and right now, with the funding that we have to turn some good projects down because there just aren't enough dollars to give them out every year. But like I said, our commitment is to try to figure out how to make sure that the good projects that we say no to this year, maybe we can say yes to in the following years. So that's all I got.
And I know since sorry to interject here, Lauren, but Patrick has to run. We've got some questions specific to you, Patrick. I'll just compile them and put them in an email and make sure that folks have your email address as well.
Yeah, I can, I'll grab them tomorrow. And do you want me to just send the answers back to you and you'll distribute
Yeah,
them?
that sounds great. Yep.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody. Bye
Thanks,
now.
Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'm just going to pop something else in the chat. This is a link to another one of our recent blog posts, which is about the latest award grantee winners for the PA Farm School Grant. So check that out if you want to learn more about that. And I'm going to introduce our last speaker, Crystal Hampton from Davis Grown in Columbia County. Crystal attended the annual Wholesaling to Institutions workshop hosted by the Department of Ag last December. She immediately took some of the resources and tips from those workshops and put them into action. In fact, she made her first phone call to the local school district's school food service director on a break during the workshop to get the conversation started. She has been actively saying yes to any and all opportunities to build partnerships with schools in her community, work with kids in creative ways, and make sure everyone in her community is aware of the farm to school related activities that she's helped to facilitate in partnership with her school partners. Thank you for being here. So to share more about your experience, Crystal, take it away.
Sure. Thanks for that nice introduction. So I guess my biggest piece of wanting to get our products into schools is obviously the health point. Getting some healthier options for the kids for lunch. And like Matt had said a little bit earlier, it seems when they have these options, they have the local options of the beef, and we did beef, sweet corn, we did ground beef, we did beef tips, and we did sweet corn. With those options, the kids really enjoyed and were very open to trying those things, where had it not been pushed out in the way that they were local, that they were coming from a local farm, I'm not sure that they would have been as receptive or tried them. So just getting them to try those different things, I think is huge. Another piece that goes along with that, as far as wanting to get involved with the schools, is that it also helps us on the back end of things, as far as the marketing and different things, that there's more community members and people from the schools seeing that we are involved with the school district and we're wanting to improve what, our students, what our kids are getting for lunches. Some of the items I said already, the ground beef, we've provided ground beef, beef cubes, and sweet corn to different school districts. I've probably reached out to about 5 or 6 school districts and currently working with 2. So hoping to expand that a little bit, either with, our fresh veggies or, with the beef. We also do pork. So trying to explore those other options out there and what we can work with the local school districts. The biggest issue that we've come across so far with working the school districts is scheduling, trying to make sure that we have the product that they need when they need it. And then as well as if it's like a discussion we're having now that they can't take the product because they already have product promised to them, or they already have product already scheduled for them for the rest of the year. So that's one thing for both ends to consider as far as scheduling. It's not likely a instant kind of thing. It's a 6 months or more out for the procurement of those items because of the scheduling that has to happen so early on. Other than that, it's a great overall what this experience has been as far as working with the school districts. It has really gotten a bigger community around it. So hearing like different Facebook posts, like we like to really advertise what we're doing and when we're doing it. It helps on both ends because the school district has gotten good feedback saying, our tax dollars are finally going where they should be and whatnot, as well as on our end that people see us, they recognize us and they say, hey, you're Davis Grown. They just served your beef at our school. The kids had it. And so getting positive feedback from both ends of it, not only on the farm side, but also on the school side for the school service directors, that they're pushing more local things. They're supporting more local stuff. And the general community board members have all given positive feedback about that.
Thank you, Crystal. And I was fortunate enough to go to the farm, and also I was able to have a conversation with Crystal as well as Melissa Everhart, the school food service director at Bloomsburg School District, where she was serving her local beef, and I was able to write a little story about what they did. So I just posted that in the chat if you guys want to check it out and learn more about their story.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren, for facilitating, and to all of our panelists. We're going to move right along because we're about to wrap up with some announcements. And I see some really awesome connecting happening in the chat and sharing of resources. So keep that coming. We do have the results of the ranking as well, which I would love to share, but I don't know if they're showing up on your slides, Jamie. So maybe we'll, I'll have to maybe see if I can share them right at the end. That's what I'll do. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Karen Long-Earl from the Department of Agriculture, who's going to share about another opportunity to be able to use some funds for local food procurement. Thank you so much, Karen, for being able to join us and share a little bit more about local food for schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we have a grant opportunity that I am hoping that we are going to be able to open, hopefully maybe end of February. We have funding that we secured from USDA, the Local Foods for Schools grant. It was originally expected to expire next June, but we are putting in a request for a 1-year extension to take it through June of 2025. We originally got about $6.8 million. We are investing about $2 million into a minimally processed apple purchase. So those are products that we are going to be distributing out to the schools starting next spring into the following year. So be on the lookout for those. But that leaves about $4.8 million that will be available for schools. We will be operating this program very similarly to the way that our friends at Department of Education have operated the supply chain assistance grants, basically sending out agreements for schools to opt into. We will be allocating those funds based essentially on school size, school meal participation. Those funds will be allowable for either fresh product or minimally processed product. Minimally processed being things like I'm thinking about apples, so like sliced packaged apples, applesauce that's unsweetened, apple juice. You know, when you're talking about beef products, it could be ground beef, you know, sliced beef. It can't be things with seasoning added or other ingredients. But, you know, a whole wide variety of opportunities. There is a preference that the products be sourced from new vendors that you haven't used before, and from socially disadvantaged vendors. And USDA's definition of socially disadvantaged to me is fascinating because it crosses the gamut from BIPOC producers, religious disadvantaged religions, women-owned, veteran-owned. It's a really wide gamut. LGBTQ plus owned. So a lot of opportunities there, but this is allowable for food purchases. So I'm hoping to get some additional funding out there for schools to be able to engage in local foods purchases. While we would like for this to be focused on Pennsylvania, it's not exclusive to necessarily Pennsylvania products. USDA's definition of local is within a 400-mile perimeter. So depending on where your school food authority is located, you could get product from neighboring states as well. Would local honey apply? I would think so. You know, I haven't had that question before. I'd have to look into that, but I would think that local honey would apply. But I can definitely look into that question. So again, hoping that we're going to be able to push that out in the spring. So be looking for some information on that. We are going to be pushing that out through contact information that we have for the schools that already work with us on USDA foods programs, but also working with the list that Pennsylvania Department of Education has for schools that don't currently work with us on USDA foods opportunities to ensure that we are covering the gamut of schools who participate in either National School Lunch or the School Breakfast program. Priority would be given to schools that have some previous experience in sourcing local foods. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've gone out and done you know, local purchasing from a local farm. It could be that, you know, you've done local purchasing from your local milk dealers. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. And I will look into the honey question.
Thank you so much, Karen. If you have more questions for Karen, feel free to pop them into the chat. We've got one more announcement before we wrap up here, and that is from my lovely friend and colleague, Kelsey Porter at the USDA, who works with states in the Mid-Atlantic, which includes Puerto Rico, fun fact, and by the USDA definition. But she's going to share about one more grant opportunity, also a timely opportunity specifically for school food service directors. So Kelsey, go ahead and take it away. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you, Sam. I have two brief but important updates for you all today. And the first is that the 4th USDA Farm to School census is currently open. Hopefully some of you have heard of the census or have even taken a look at results from years past. The census is the only national survey that provides a snapshot of how schools all across the country are participating in farm to school activities like local food purchases, school gardens, agricultural education. And completing the census is important for a variety of reasons. On the whole, the census identifies opportunities for farm to school expansion and barriers to participation. So the information, it's useful to federal and state governments, making decisions about farm to school resource allocation or programming needs. And then on the more local level, the information from the census can be used by a wide variety of local partners. So support organizations writing grant applications, or schools who might be interested in what other schools in their area are doing, or farmers who might be interested in seeing which schools near them are interested in purchasing local products. And the 2019 census showed that more than 75% of responding schools in Pennsylvania participated in at least one farm to school activity, and more than 80% were serving local foods, and Tegan kind of alluded to some of those numbers earlier too. But we're very eager to know what the 2023 census will show and if it will show sustained momentum in our state. So it opened on Monday, October 2nd. It will close next Friday, December 15th. Every school district's food service director received a unique link to complete the survey. And directors have been encouraged to connect with their school community to make sure they're getting the most accurate information possible. So if you work at a school or as a community member connected to a school, I would definitely ask your district school food service director if they've completed the census, and if they've not, please encourage them to do so. And I do have a link to the census, the more information about the census on the slide. And then the other update, as Sam mentioned, is that our annual Farm to School grant program, the Patrick Leahy Farm to School grant program, is also open currently, and applications are due January 12th. So again, hopefully this is something some of you are familiar with. Since the beginning of the grant program, when it started in 2013, more than $2.5 million has been awarded to more than 30 projects in Pennsylvania. So some great work has been supported. It is one of those grants, as Jillian was kind of mentioning, that is not meant to fund the routine purchase of local food products like an LFPI would, or like the program Karen just talked about would. But it can fund a really wide variety of activities: training, infrastructure, equipment, staff time. There's actually 5 different tracks within the program, and eligible entities include any school or site operating a child nutrition program like the National School Lunch Program or the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Nonprofit organizations, agricultural producers are eligible, state and local governments. So eligible to a pretty wide variety of entities. And award amounts, they vary by track, but they can go up to $100,000 or even $500,000. So this could be a great opportunity for some of you might be interested in, and I would encourage you to check it out further. And again, there's a link on the slide to learn more. So, okay, I know we have just 1 minute left in this meeting, so hopefully that was quick enough. Thank you for letting me come on and share those 2 updates.
Thank you for being here, Kelsey. And yes, we are at the very end of our meeting. Thank you all so much for bearing with our very tight agenda, for all your engagement in the chat. Here are the results from our little ranked voting that we did earlier around the values of why schools procuring local food and serving them to kids in meals are important. Thank you everybody for being here, for participating. And there's one more link we'll throw in the chat just to wrap up. If you're interested in staying more involved, staying in the know and informed about various different opportunities and resources related to local food procurement for schools and other farm to school activities, please do subscribe to our newsletter if you are not already. And we look forward to seeing you in future events like this, and also in our new member info sessions, which we will be publicizing in our newsletter in January that will kick off in the beginning of the year. So thanks again. And this officially wraps up our open house. If you have any questions or you want to stick around, we do have a few more minutes that some of us will be here. But otherwise, we really appreciate you joining us. So thanks again and have a great evening.